Hello, friends. This is Lauren Taylor for This Calls for Confetti. Thanks for joining me here on our YouTube channel. I'm going to be using some fun new products that were just recent released. I absolutely love cryptids, and I was so excited that Lisa was so willing to create a Bigfoot line. I am just in love with all of the different products, and I think that they are perfect for not only the cutesy lovers of products like I am, but also the more realistic with the different dyes and paper that was just released. The stencils are also amazing, and so many great sentiments on the Sentimental Sasquatch stamp set. So, no matter what you need a cryptid card for, you can find some wonderful sentiments for your projects. I also have a ton of the different satin confetti that I'm going to be using to create a shaker card, but let's jump into our stenciling. I have a piece of A2 cardstock. This is kind of a cream vanilla-y color, and I'm going to be stenciling. So I'm just using a grip mat to keep my paper in place while I stencil. You can definitely use magnets or any type of light sticky grip mats that you have in your stash. I'm going to be creating first the giant footprint. This is called the Bigfoot Footprint 6x6 stencil. And I'm going to be creating a shaker card using the frame from the Hello Elongated frame die set. So I want to make sure that my foot is going to be showing. I like the very top of the footprint. So I'm going to lower that stencil down, even though there is a wonderful handy A2 rectangle etched into the stencil. I am bringing it down just a bit so I can make sure that footprint, the very top of it, will show through my frame die cut when I get to that step. I'm bringing out Distress ink in Scorched Timber, and I'm just using a blending brush that I use for dye-based brown inks, and I'm blending the ink through the stencil. I started with the the toes of the footprint because I wanted the top to be darker and have it kind of fade out towards the bottom of the paper. So as I added color to my brush, I did ink more to the top and then brought that color down. Next, I'm using this tree scene from the Forest Landscape Stencil set. Again, making sure I like the placement of the trees, that it will show through that oval elongated frame die. And I'm actually going to bring this stencil up a little bit. So I did put my paper through the stencil so I don't have a harsh line at the bottom. And this time I'm going to use Distress Oxide because I'm adding the color on top of the footprint that I already stenciled, which was a dye-based ink. And I wanted the green to sit a little bit more on top of that dye ink. So in Rustic Wilderness and another blending brush that I use for oxides, I added that green ink through the trees on my stencil or with my stencil onto this background, and I love that big footprint kind of in the back of my scene. I grabbed Scorched Timber, this time in Distress Oxide, and I do apologize that I am so shaky. I am a very aggressive ink blender, so I do apologize for it being a little shaky here. But I am just adding some of that Scorched Timber, this time in Distress Oxide, to the edges of my card. I didn't go over the green. I just wanted the top to have a little bit more brown peeking through what will be the frame of my shaker card. I want to add a little bit of splatter, so I squished some of that Distress Oxide Scorched Timber onto my glass mat. And I also added a little bit of clear shimmer, and I'm mixing it up with a paintbrush and splattering that all over my background. It's just going to add some splatter, some interest with a tiny bit of shimmer because I did add that liquid shimmer to my ink. You can see that subtle shimmer here, and I'm going to set this aside to dry while I clean up my desk. Now we're going to move into creating the shaker. So first I'm going to start with the frame. I flipped through my Elusive prints and I'm going to use the topographical map, that green one, as well as brown for my Sasquatch or my Bigfoot. So I'm going to use that green pattern paper to be the frame of my shaker, and I'm going to die cut my Sasquatch out of the brown cardstock. Again, both of these are from the Elusive Prints 6x6 paper pad. Once those are die cut, I'm going to grab my acetate and we're going to create the front of my shaker. You can see how perfectly that footprint and the trees look through that hello elongated frame die. It's going to make this shaker card so easy having that frame just die cut from that die set. Now, I didn't want my Sasquatch to completely cover my footprint, so I know that I kind of want him off to the corner of my oval. So when I'm adhering my layers together, I just need to make sure I slide my Bigfoot through my oval. So I will talk about that when I get there. I took a sheet of my acetates. This is the A2 size from This Calls for Confetti, and there is a protective film on one of the sides. So I used my lift and release tool, the pokey side, to peel off that protective sheet. I have 1/4 inch double-sided adhesive, and I'm going to add that to all the sides and corners on the back of my frame. I didn't add any adhesive to the very thin parts of my frame, but I'm not going to worry about that. It's not going to matter. It will attach just fine to my acetate sheet without having an adhesive on those really thin pieces. So now I'm again playing with my layout and figuring out where I want my Bigfoot to be, but I'm going to start with attaching my frame to my acetate in the top left-hand corner, and then I will apply the frame to the acetate down the longer side, the 5.5 inch side, and then the top, which is the 4 1/4 side. Then I slid my Bigfoot in. I didn't press down firmly yet. I wanted to make sure I was happy with the placement of my Sasquatch. And once I was, I went ahead and pressed the rest of that frame onto the acetate. This is when I realized that I probably should have put some adhesive behind my Sasquatch. So I'm just going to peel off a few strips of this double-sided adhesive to fill the back of my Sasquatch. I did some on his arms and his body and legs. I peeled off the release paper and then pressed him in place onto the acetate. Now I didn't get it lined up perfectly, which is totally fine. So I'm just going to use some large scissors to trim off the acetate that's sticking off one of the edges, as well as his poor little feet that stick out from the bottom of my frame. I really love how he's coming out of the frame and his left hand is outside the frame. If you're looking at it like a shadow, I just think it looks really kind of cool and creepy. I am going to trim down my background paper just a teeny tiny bit so I don't have to worry about lining up my paper perfectly. I have plenty of room there on the two sides, the two left and right sides, to be able to line up my paper, so it's okay if it's not perfectly straight, and it just gives me less to have to trim off just in case. I'm using the double-sided adhesive foam strips from This Calls for Confetti. They are honestly the perfect dimension for creating things to pop up on your card, but I do need them a little bit thicker, so there's plenty of room for all of my sequins and clay confetti pieces that I'm going to put in my shaker. So I did fold them over on themselves before attaching to the back of my frame, just to make it twice as thick, so there's a little bit more room for my shaker elements to be able to move. So I just line up the edges together and gently adhere it to itself so it's twice as thick. I'm pulling off both sides of the release paper as it's easier to curve the foam. And when I start my next piece onto my frame, I make sure to butt them up against each other so there's no way for my sequins to fall out of my shaker. There's a nice snug connection between all the pieces of foam on the back of my frame. I also added foam to the corner so there's stability on my card. And then for the really thin parts of the frame, I'm just cutting those strips in half so they're teeny tiny. I could probably have just die cut this frame maybe like 5 or 6 times with some scrap cardstock, and I wouldn't have to use foam, but I wanted to show you that you could use foam strips even in those little small areas of the elongated frame die, and it will be just as great of a shaker card. But if you don't want to cut foam really thin, you can die cut a few of these frames and just glue them all together, and that will create the well for your shaker. Now, I couldn't decide on which of these satin confettis I wanted to use, so I'm going to use all of them and create my own shaker mix. I started with the satin gold, and then I added in the satin copper, but this was when I realized that I probably should have taken my It's No Secret anti-static tool and made sure that I applied that to the edge of all of my foam. Since I did layer them together, there could be a chance that I didn't line up the edges perfectly, and I didn't want my sequins to get stuck to the foam. So I'm just taking this little tool and adding it to the edges of the foam, making sure that my sequins will be able to move freely when I shake my card. So I'll continue adding in my shaker bits. So next I'm adding the satin moss green, and then finally I will add in satin walnut. I really love all four of these together, but the real fun part I think are the green trees, the polymer clay bits. I think that's so fun, and it matches the green that I have on the background of my shaker. I used the grid to get my piece straight, and then I added the backing, which was my stenciled background, to my back of my frame with all of that foam adhesive. And as you can see, all of my sequins and my trees are moving. There's plenty of space from doubling up the foam, and it doesn't seem to be getting stuck to the edges thanks to that It's No Secret anti-static tool. So my card is pretty much assembled, but let's add a sentiment. I'm making a Father's Day card, so I'm going to stamp the Happy Father's Day sentiment from the stamp set. I tend to forget to stamp on the inside of my card, so as I'm editing, I will probably stamp after I'm done. But there are also really great sentiments for the insides of Father's Day cards, so this is a great stamp set to have in your collection. I took another piece of that same cream vanilla cardstock, and I'm going to stamp that Happy Father's Day in VersaFine Clair in the color Fallen Leaves. I like that it was more of a purplier brown, and I thought it went well with the walnut satin confetti inside my shaker card. I'm going to get out my paper trimmer, and I'm going to trim the sentiment down to a sentiment strip. I didn't get it quite as scooched over as I should have, so my sentiment is a little not centered on my strip, but I didn't mind. And then I also trimmed a strip a little bit larger than my sentiment in that same brown paper from the Elusive Prints paper pad that I die cut my Sasquatch out of. I cut a little bit of a banner edge after the word day, and I'm going to adhere this strip to the brown. I'm going to give it a bit of a drop shadow look, so I am gluing it to the top left corner of that strip. And then I'll take my scissors and do my best to create a parallel cut to that vanilla cardstock. So it just has a fun little kind of double flag look for my sentiment. To attach it, I'm going to grab that same foam adhesive strip, but I'm not going to double it up this time. I'm going to do my best to measure a good cut to be able to add that foam adhesive on the back of my banner sentiment. I will peel off the release paper and attach it to my card. I kind of struggled with where I was going to place my sentiment. I knew that I wanted it to come from the left since my Sasquatch is kind of peeking out from the right, and that would just give it a little bit of balance, but I didn't want to cover my footprint, so I ended up putting it a little bit lower on the card so you can still see those fun little toes for the background. I have my A2 card base, and I use some double-sided super sturdy Scotch adhesive to add my adhesive to the card base, and then I lined up my shaker front onto the card. Here's a final look of how this fun Sasquatch Shaker Father's Day card turned out. I love the stenciling and the die cutting and the paper pad, and I love that these satin sequins just match so perfectly. Here's one more look at the card. Let me know what you think of this Father's Day card with a comment on this video. I hope you'll hit like if you enjoyed today's tutorial, and if you're new here, we hope you'll subscribe and come back. Make sure to check out more inspiration here on the This Calls for Confetti YouTube channel. Thanks for watching and have a wonderful day. Bye!